everybody out in YouTube land, my name is Mike and I love guitars. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the IR-D dual tube preamp and DI from Friedman. Let's do this. Disclaimer! Disclaimer! Disclaimer. This is not a sponsored video. All gear in this video was either purchased by me or by a friend who's lending it to me for the purposes of this video. Most importantly, all thoughts and opinions expressed in this video are mine. It's no secret that amps in pedal form have been a pretty popular thing for guitarists for a few years now. Companies are releasing new pedals all the time, and the market for them is already getting crowded. While the flexibility of something like a Quad Cortex or Helix is great for different amp sounds and effects, preamp pedals are not only a lot simpler to use, they're also usually a lot cheaper. Dave Friedman is a legend in the modded Marshall space, and his amps are highly sought after. And while his amps are generally completely out of my budget, something like the IR-D, which retails for about $500, is a lot more obtainable for us mere mortals. The IR-D is the second pedal that Friedman has released in the IR line, with the IR-X being the first pedal and the most recent pedal being the IR-J. The IR-D uses a modified JTM45 circuit based on Friedman's twin sister amp, with the twin sister being the dual channel version of the Dirty Shirley amp. Did you get all that? Moving on. The IR-D is a dual 12AX7 powered preamp pedal with two boostable, independent, but identical channels. Both channels have knobs for boost volume, master volume, treble, middle bass, and gain. There are tiny toggle switches for both channels to select between 3 different preloaded cabinet IRs, 2 different brightness settings, and 3 different preamp gain stages. On the side of the pedal, we even have these 2 little trim pots to adjust the boost gain. On the back, we've got an input, a balanced output, an effects loop send and return, a ground lift switch, a headphone output jack. Make sure you turn the master volume down before using it. A MIDI connector for use with a MIDI controller, a USB port, we'll talk more about that later, and a power connector. Unfortunately, I don't actually own any Friedman amps, nor have I had a chance to plug into one before now, so I can't comment on how accurate the sound is to the full-size version of the Friedman amp. So we're just going to treat this as its own thing, and we're just going to see what kind of sounds we can get with it. It is worth pointing out that while the IRX and the IRJ are meant to be more high-gain preamps, the IR-D, as previously stated, is a JTM45 circuit, so it's got a much more classic crunch sound. Having said that, it can definitely get dirty and gainy. Let's plug it in, turn some knobs, and see what we come up with. Okay, we've got the IR-D all set up and connected, got a guitar. We're just going to play a little, noodle around, see what it sounds like. For the moment, all controls are set to noon. We're just going to adjust as we go. Right now we're actually gain stage 1, which is actually the highest level of gain. We're using cab IR1. And again, we'll switch through all that as we go. So even though this is a JTM45 circuit and it's technically a lower gain classic crunch sound, it can absolutely get dirty. And that's without the overdrive. Let's kick the overdrive on, see how it sounds. Again, that's just with cab 1. Let's switch to cabs 2 and 3 and kind of see how it changes. Cab 1 is actually modeled after Dave's shop 4x12 cabinet that he's had for years. Cab 2 is actually modeled after an 80s 4x12 with greenbacks in it. Definitely has that scooped 80s sound. Cab 3 is an open back cabinet. Now let's play around with the other gain stages. Stage 1 is actually the lowest gain level. Let's try switching the brightness settings, see what changes that gives us. Definitely a darker tone. I'll switch back up to 1 because I like that better. A lot more clarity to it. kind of liking that open back cabinet. Okay, let's check out gain stage 3. We've gone through pretty much all the settings in channel 1. There's really no point to trying out channel 2 because they're identical channels. I think that should give you a pretty good idea of how varied the tonal range on this thing is. It's really versatile with all the different cab IRs and everything you have access to. Now that we've heard both full mixes and isolated guitars with the IR-D, let's connect it to the computer, open up the Friedman Editor, and see what all options we have in the software. Okay. Now we have the IR-D connected to the computer, we have the Friedman Editor open. We're just going to play around in the settings and see what we got. As you can see, we've got a nice visual representation of the pedal. We've got all the knobs, all the switches. We even have the LEDs that says channel 1 is activated and the boost is activated. Now, one thing we don't have with the Editor software is mirroring on the settings of the knobs and most of the switches. I'll explain in a second. Now, the reason we don't have that mirroring on the knobs and most of the switches is because this is an analog circuit, so it just doesn't have the possibility of a digital mirror. The exception to that rule is simple. The cab IR selector, because the cab IR is a digital element to this pedal, you can click and switch between the 3 preloaded cab IRs. You can also click to select the channels. As you can see, it's going back and forth between channel 1 and channel 2. You can also click to turn the boost on and off. But those are really the only 3 digital elements that we can actually click to manipulate the pedal itself. Well, I say that, that's not exactly accurate. There over here, you do have the option to increase the presence, turn it off. There's also a deep setting that you can click, and then a low pass that you can click. And that's for both channels. But those aren't settings that are on the pedal, which is why I didn't include that in my earlier statement. Up here, you can also select channel 1, channel 2 this way instead of clicking the actual buttons. Same with boost, turn it on, turn it off here instead of clicking the boost button. There's also a loop bypass on the top here and an IR bypass if you want to bypass either one of those. You can even set programs and change the programs here as far as setting it for channel versus boost, that sort of thing. Again, you can't set knob settings because those don't track in the digital editor. I don't have any MIDI controllers, so I'm not going to try and go through the MIDI stuff. It just wouldn't make any sense for me to try and go through that not having a MIDI controller. One final thing that to me is probably the coolest feature of the Friedman Editor is, again, the pedal comes preloaded with 3 different cab IRs. However, if you just click this little plus sign right here, there's a lot more to choose from. I think 15 different options you can choose from here, but it's tons of possibility. All you have to do, again, click the plus sign and scroll through. There's a nice little description of each cabinet, so this is really where it's at. The other really, really cool feature, if you wanted, you can click this little button here, and then it opens a separate window, so you can actually load your own cabinet IRs if you really want to. I would much rather try the Friedman IRs than the ones that I have preloaded, so I'm not going to use that. If I was going to do something like that, I would just turn the IR bypass on, record, and then load in the IR in my DAW. But still, that's a really cool feature to have if you've got some really, really nice high-end IRs. The final really nice thing about this, the first thing I did when I plugged it into my computer, I opened up the Friedman Editor and I looked for an update option. I couldn't find one, and I couldn't figure out how to update firmware, so I had to do a little bit bit of research online. As it turns out, when you connect the IR-D to your computer and you open up the Friedman Editor, it automatically updates firmware. As you can see down here in the corner, we're actually running firmware version 2.0. So that's really cool that it automatically grabs that latest firmware, automatically loads it as soon as you plug it in. So it's just one less thing to have to worry about. And that's pretty much all the features for the Friedman Editor. It doesn't completely control every single aspect of the pedal, but considering this pedal is really an analog circuit, that's not surprising. It would be nice if it were possible for those people who were fully digital only, but it's not a deal breaker to not have that functionality. Just a lot of really cool extra bells and whistles to tweak it to your heart's content and to get this sounding exactly how you want it. So what do I think overall? Well, frankly, the first thing that came to mind while I was tinkering with this pedal was, holy crap, this thing is absolutely awesome. I'm an older guy and I just really like the tactile feel of turning knobs, so I've just never connected with amp modelers, though I fully appreciate their quality and convenience. For me, the Friedman IR-D is the best of both worlds. I get real knobs to turn in a compact, affordable, easy to transport unit that sounds amazing. If I had a gig to play somewhere with a good monitoring system or ideally in-ears, this pedal on a board with maybe one or two other effects is really all I would need, and my Gen X back would absolutely love me for it. A quad cortex or a helix might be better in a cover band scenario where you need several different sounds, but for an original music set, if you don't need a high gain tone, the IR-D would be very hard to beat. On a side note, historically, I've never really been a big pedal guy. I tend to have a pretty simple setup with one, maybe two pedals in front of my amp. But I'm curious, do you guys want to see more pedal-related content, more preamp pedals, or maybe just simple effects pedals? Just let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Well, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please let me know in the comments below. Also, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really does help with the YouTube algorithm. Oh, man. Here we go. I am getting too old for this.